going to set this up and put crown molding on this wall. So what I'm going to do is mark off 5 3/4 inches from the ceiling, because my total distance from the ceiling to the bottom of the molding is 7 inches, and I have 1 1/4 thick stop molding that I'm going to put there. I take my measurements when I'm doing crown molding, and I'll measure off from one side of the wall to an even number. Now right here I have 100 inches. I already had someone hold the tape measure, my son. He held it on that end. I measured from there to here and I have 100 inches. I just make it simple and round off. I have 100 inches right here, so when I measure from this wall to that 100 inches, I have 39 1/4. So now I know this piece is going to be 139 1/4 inches, and I mark it on the wall. That way you get a perfect measurement, because if you take this tape, pull it across this whole room, and bend it on the wall, it's going to be hard to get that exact measurement. Alright, once I determine where these lines are, I have these lines, and I know what the length is here, I'm marking off for my studs. Now I'm going to measure over from my first stud that I found, and I'm going to mark off 16 inches. You can't guarantee that it's 16 inches there, because framers make mistakes, everybody makes mistakes, and if they're running through a house, sometimes they're off a little bit. That gives me a good ballpark. I can hit the wall and feel. Right here I have a stud, because I felt this one. Sometimes you won't feel it. Now, just to make sure, I'm going to use a stud finder, and I'll come by with a stud finder, make my marks. I put my mark a little bit above where that molding is, so that way I'm going to know it's going to be painted for one thing, and the other thing is I'm going to know exactly where my studs are for my crown and for this. I'll nail it on here, and then this is going to be painted over, so I'm not worried about it. Never use a pen when you're marking your walls, because that's permanent. Use a pencil. You can always erase it and then paint that section, or you can just paint right over it. Usually it covers over easily with latex paint. Now, I always use a striker pencil by Striker Hand Tools. This is a great little pencil because I always have lead. I click the button and I've got lead. I have refills for it, so I keep this with me everywhere I go. When cutting crown molding, there's just a couple of things to remember, and you'll be able to do it right every time. Usually the detail is on the bottom of the crown molding, so the large span would be up top, and this little cove right here shows you that this is the bottom of the crown. When you cut crown molding, you have to flip it upside down, and you're going to cut backwards because your left becomes your right, okay? Or on this side, this is your right board. You see what I'm talking about? It just goes opposite. No big deal. If you cut into your length of board, that's an inside cut. This is an outside cut, which means this is the bottom and this is the top. And you see I'm cutting away from the length of my board. If I cut away from the length of my board, it's an outside cut. If I cut into my length of the board, it's an inside cut. It's very simple. All you do is mark your piece of wood if you have any trouble remembering. Once you do it a few times, it becomes second nature. But right now, just mark your wood and you'll know exactly where to go. This is an outside cut. Here is an inside cut. Let me put it the way it goes on the wall or your ceiling. This part right here goes on the ceiling, and you can see the long points at the bottom because that's what's going to touch your wall and go inward for an inside cut. It's very simple. Now I want you to take a look at the saw, because we're going to set the saw up and I'm going to show you how to make sure you lay the crown molding on this fence properly on your saw. Okay, pay attention carefully, and I'm going to show you how to make this real easy. This is a crown stop. Crown stops will slide back and forth, and you can take it once your piece is set in place and you lock it down, and that's going to keep every board exactly in the same spot. So when you make your cuts, every cut's going to be the same. Now, before you lock this down, just make sure you have this perfect against this wall. If this sits up a little bit like this or down the other way, you're going to have a bad cut. So you want to make sure this is perfectly flat against the back fence. You set it in place and you lock it down. Okay? Now, if you don't have crown stops, I'm going to show you another easy way to make your cuts and keep them precise. Put a piece of tape on your base right here and on the other side. Don't put it in the middle, because if you swivel this, it's going to get torn. The tape's going to hang on there. So if you put a piece of tape right here, you take your crown making sure it's perfectly flush on there. You take a sharp pencil and mark your line on both sides. Now, once you mark that line, you've got it there for your next piece. You take your next piece, as long as it's set on that line, you're going to have a perfect cut. It's very simple. Another thing that's going to really help you is you can put a piece of tape on this base part right here and just write top on it. That way, you know the top of this crown should match up with the base right here that says top. Okay, as long as you have this, the top part of here on here matching this, you know you're right. If you put it up like this is the bottom part of the crown, and it's not matching up. It's easy. Before we start cutting, we want to make sure that this saw is calibrated. Just remember one thing, please work safe when you're working around power equipment. Always unplug your saw before touching your blade and wear safety goggles. It always helps. What I do is I loosen the back up where this swivels, and I'll take a square and I set this square on my table. Once I set it on my table, I will line up my saw to make sure that it is perfectly straight at a 90-degree angle. So once I have it straight up and down at 90 degrees, and I double check it with my square, I know I'm good and I'm going to have perfect cuts every time. If I'm going to make an outside cut, this is going to be my long point. So I'll just make a mark showing that's the direction. Okay? Like I said, once you're used to it, you're going to know. But this is my direction. So I set it upside down, and you can see I still have my direction there. I'm cutting away from the length of board because that's going to give me a perfect outside cut. Once I set this up, I'll line it up with my line here on my tape. I get a 45-degree angle. And that's my cut. Now I'm going to show you how we match it up. All I'm doing is making a right and left-handed cut so they match together. I'll put my lines together. I'll make my cut, and I'm just going to cut this in half to show you. You see my two outside pieces? You put them together, and there's my cut. Now let's go ahead and make an inside cut. Your inside cut, the bottom part's going to be your long point, okay? Bottom point's your long point, so you know your angle goes inward from the bottom. Okay, we're cutting into the length of wood, so that means it's an inside cut. What I do, flip it upside down just like I did earlier. I'm cutting this way into the length of wood because I'm going with the inside cut. I set this on my line, and I know I'm exact, right on my line. I make my cut. Keep in mind, you don't want to ram this saw quick into there and make a real chop cut because you'll have it frayed real bad and you'll have a nasty cut. Now I have this side, I want to make this side. This cut right here, of course, is an inside cut again. So my bottom's my long point and I'm cutting into my length of wood. Keep that in your head and you'll never go wrong. I'll flip it upside down, set it at a 45-degree angle, and then I'm going to set this on the line and make my cut. Now, I'm going to take this and cut it in half just to show you how these match. This is the way it's going to go on the ceiling, and that is my inside cut. I'm going to have another episode showing exactly how to cut crown with coping and a few more details. Right now we want to show how to finish this room up.